Okay, once again, we'd like to turn to Psalm 23. And verse 4, the life of relationship. This will be part 2 of that. Verse 4, Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And we'll stop right there. We have pointed out several times in verses 1 through 3, he speaks of God in third person. He, his. And then here in verse 4, we see he begins to speak in first person concerning God, which means that he is now talking to God. Thou, thy. So he's moved from talking about God to talking to God. And we pointed out last week, even when he talked about God, he did so in first person singular. In other words, he related what he was saying about God to himself. So he's not just merely talking about God with no personal acquaintance, but he's talking about God in a way in which he knows him and identifies with him. Again, people can talk about God and have absolutely no personal connection whatsoever, and a person can talk about God and relate what they're saying to themselves, and that's what David does in those first 3 verses. But none of us should stop at just talking about God. We must move to talking with God. So here in verse 4, and it continues through verse 5, there's a dramatic shift in the language of David. Again, he goes from talking about and of God to talking with the Lord. So there is an advance from making comments about God to communion with the Lord. Again, it's a wonderful thing to personally experience the truth of the Lord is my shepherd. But it's a wonder on a completely different level to know him as your shepherd, to know who he is. Not just knowing that he is a shepherd, but knowing who the shepherd is. So, whether David is talking of the Lord or talking to the Lord, and such should be true of us, he's living in the reality of the fact that the Lord was his personal shepherd, the fact that the Lord was sufficient for all his needs. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He was living in the reality of the fact that the Lord provided places of restful nourishment and contentment. We see there in verse 2, he's living in the reality of the fact that the Lord has and continues to restore his soul. He's living in the fact of God's directing hand, his protection, his drawing presence, his marvelous provision as you get down into verse 5. So he's living in the reality of the Lord's ability to give relief. It's all very, very real to him. But in verses 4 and 5, again, with the change from third person to second person, there seems to be a progression of personal experience, a progression of relationship. The progression of experience, the progression of relationship. This is pictured, if we go over to 1 John chapter 1, the verse we've looked at in the past. 1 John chapter 1 and verse 1. That which was from the beginning, this is the Apostle John writing, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon, and our hands have handled of the Word. Christ is the Word of life. Now in this, there are advancing stages. He goes from hearing to seeing. That's a progression. To see is more than hearing. He says, we have heard, we have seen with our own eyes, or with our eyes, which we have looked upon. Now that is a further progression from seeing. It's one thing to see something. It's another thing to look upon it. That means you've basically stopped and you're focused upon this. You can see something pass by, but to look upon it, that's an advance in seeing. And then he goes on to say, our hands have handled, which of course is an advance, even a further advance. So seeing is a progression from hearing. Looking is a closer, more deliberate inspection, something more than just seeing. And handling involves a closeness, involves a contact, something that goes beyond hearing, beyond seeing, beyond looking, handling, touching. So, and the result of this progression, again in 1 John there, chapter 1, I lost my place, verse 2, for the life, that is the life of Christ, was manifested. That is, was made obvious. It was made clear. It was made plain. It became evident. It became definite. It became unmistakable. Again, this is the result of hearing, seeing, looking, handling. Christ was made manifest, and we have seen it. That is, this manifestation of Christ. Now, following the manifestation, notice, for the life was manifest, and we have seen it, and bear witness. So it has an impact upon him now. And the more you advance in a relationship with Christ, you go from hearing to seeing to looking to handling, closer contact. The more impact it has upon you personally. And when we see that here, and show unto, we bear witness, and show unto you. That is, now they can be a blessing to someone else because of their relationship with. In this 23rd Psalm, we have a progression in personal experience and relationship. And as you get to verses 4 and 5, there's a progression in personal impact and effect as well. And that's what's brought out here in 1 John chapter 1. Again, a growing relationship with the Lord. That is an absolute necessity to living the Christian life. And as that progresses, the impact it has upon us becomes more pronounced, and the more useful we become to testify to others. Otherwise, it's just empty words. So, let's look, if we go back to Psalm 23, we have the testimony of the psalmist throughout the 23rd Psalm. He, again, is, in verse 4, he's speaking with the Lord. He's enjoying communion. He has an interaction with the Lord. You can talk of God and have no interaction whatsoever with Him. He's, as you read the 23rd Psalm, whether he's talking of the Lord or whether he's talking to the Lord, he's experiencing Him, and he is enjoying the Lord Himself. You can talk about the Lord and not have any enjoyment whatsoever in what you're talking about. But that wasn't the case here. We see the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He's talking of the Lord, but he's also enjoying the Lord. And as you read these first 3 verses, when he's talking of the Lord, you can sense that he's enjoying what he's saying. He's enjoyed this. It's a personal experience. There's a bond. There's a friendship. There's an affection that exists between the Lord and Himself. There's an ongoing concord of heart with God. There's an ongoing acknowledgement of the relevancy of the Lord in his life. So again, we see this. Thou, in verse 4, he begins talking to the Lord. He's personally experiencing the Lord, and he says, "Thou art with me." He's personally experiencing that. He's enjoying that. He says, "Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." Now, the rod was used to examine and to direct the sheep and clear the way for the sheep and to protect the sheep. And the staff, of course, was more for drawing the sheep to the shepherd. And he's experiencing this. And he's enjoying it. And again, something's terribly wrong if our experience of the Lord is not an enjoyment. And that's part of a relationship. He goes on to say, "Thou preparest the table before me." David is not only enjoying a table prepared, but he's taking delight in the one who prepares the table. So he's not only experiencing and enjoying God's provision, but he's enjoying the God who provides it. And so we have to be careful. That I'm afraid a lot of times we enjoy the blessing of God, we enjoy what God gives us, what God does for us, and we can do that without enjoying God Himself. And that should never be so. In all of God's blessings, we should enjoy the God who gives the blessing and everything that God does for us. It's not just what God does for us, it's God Himself. And that's what we mean by a relationship. Again, you listen to people talk, and they will talk about blessings, nothing wrong with that, but there doesn't seem to be, there's an enjoyment of the blessing, but you have to wonder, Are they enjoying God, the one who gives the blessing? So we can enjoy the blessing without enjoying the one who gives the blessing. And we have to take heed. We have to be aware of when we do that. He goes on and says, Thou anointest my head with oil. This is a picture of relief. David, again, is not, he's not merely experiencing and enjoying the relief, but he's enjoying the one who gives the relief. Then he says, My cup runneth over. Not only with the blessings of the Lord, but with the Lord himself. So he's not only experiencing the overflow of the blessings of God, but he's experiencing the overflow of the Lord in his life. This is what we mean by an ongoing relationship with the Lord. It's an enjoyment of the Lord himself, not just in what the Lord gives and what the Lord does. So in all of this, the psalmist is, in this 23rd psalm, he's experiencing and enjoying the blessings of the Lord, but not apart from the Lord. And we're in danger of that. Enjoying the blessings of God, but enjoying them apart from the Lord. We cannot separate the blessings from the one who gives the blessings. And that's relationship. So we need to be aware of experiencing and enjoying the blessings of God apart from the one who gives them. So a relationship with the Lord. And I believe I've expressed this for put emphasis on this the last 35 years or so. The emphasis has to be there. The emphasis has to be on a personal relationship with the Lord. Because without that, you don't really have much. You really don't. And you may know more than most people about the Lord, but without a relationship, you really don't have much. And I believe that explains why many who profess to be God's people are the most miserable people on the planet. Because they know all these things about God, but they can't bring it into their life. There's no relationship. That's frustrating. And that's going to lead to a life of misery. And it's almost like the more they know, the more miserable they become. Because they know all this stuff, but they don't experience any of it. And it would be very distressing. So a relationship, as we've said many times, is far, far more than religion. Religion will not save your soul. Religion has never saved anyone. Salvation is in a person, Jesus Christ. And no one has ever lived the Christian life by mere religion. It takes more than that. It takes a relationship. Before Paul was saved, he had religion. Notice in Philippians chapter 3. Philippians chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. You know, if someone says to you, well, you're and the lost people, they don't understand what they're saying, but they'll say, well, you're a very religious person. You need to correct them. No, I've got a relationship with Christ. And then let them know that religion doesn't save anyone. But in Philippians 3, verse 5, he says that he was circumcised the 8th day. That's a religious rite, ceremony. Of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, and Hebrew of the Hebrews, as touching the law, a Pharisee. That is, he was very righteous. He outwardly obeyed the law of God. Concerning zeal, he was very zealous in his religion. Persecuting the church. That is, in his zeal, he didn't know better, but he had a zeal of ignorance. and he persecuted the church, touching the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. But what things were gained to me? He counted all of these things before he knew the Lord. All of this was gained to him. This was something to boast of. But of course, when he learned of Christ and Christ saved him, he counted all of these but loss. So a person can have religion and be as unsaved as can be. Religion is a system of attitudes, beliefs, and practices, and then a commitment and a devotion to those beliefs. That won't save you. You have to have a belief in Christ. So a relationship goes far beyond religion. You may, though all of this religion may be in the name of God. It can be all done in the name of God. Again, you've done many things in my name, but I will say I never knew you. It's all done in the name of God, done in the name of Christ. But it can, even though it's done in His name, it can all be devoid of God, and it can be all apart from God. Mere religion knows of God. They know the doctrine of God. They know the theory of God. But relationship knows God. Big difference. Big difference. And you cannot live the Christian life without this relationship with God. It means that God is a living reality in your life. His care, His voice, His touch. All of these things are reality in life. It's a conscious and real closeness to Him. And that's what we mean by relationship. So how do we attain? And then how do we maintain? Relationships can be, speaking of humans, relationships are broken all the time. So relationships have to be maintained. And if they're not, they're going to become broken. They're going to be severed. So it is with the Lord. We attain a relationship with God, and that relationship has to be maintained. Now, a relationship with the Lord necessitates salvation. An unsaved person has no relationship, personal relationship, with the Lord. So without salvation, there's no personal relationship with the Lord. There may be religion. One may be very committed to a religious system, whether it's this church or some other church, it doesn't matter. They may be very committed to a system, and a religious system may even shape their lives, may shape their entire life. But there is no personal relationship outside of a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. So this relationship is initiated in salvation by God. And a relationship does not stay. Now the saving relationship does, but these things don't just happen automatically. Though God initiated a relationship in salvation, it does not progress, that is the relationship, it does not grow through neglect. Relationships cannot be neglected. And whether it be marriage, it doesn't matter. Relationships need to be fed. They need to grow. And so it is with the Lord. So a personal relationship with God requires depth. There has to be depth. And this requires time. The longer we're saved, the more depth there should be to our relationship with the Lord. But it not only requires time, it requires effort. Now, with human relationships, it requires effort on both parts. But we're talking about a relationship with the Lord. It doesn't require an effort from God. It does require an effort from us. I'm not talking about salvation. I'm talking about a relationship. A relationship with God requires determination on our part. It requires discipline on our part. It requires work. And it requires growth. Now that's true with human relationships. Again, whether it be husband and wife, brother and sister, it doesn't matter. They require determination. This is going to work. It requires discipline and work and growth. And we have to grow. We have to grow spiritually. If we don't grow spiritually, our relationship does not grow. And the two go hand in hand. A personal relationship with the Lord requires a separation unto the Lord. Again, Romans 12, verse 1. Present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God. Most important two words in Romans 12, 1 and 2. Unto God. And this is the direction of true separation. It has to be unto God. If you separate first of all unto God, then separation from the things of the world, that's just a byproduct. That's a byproduct of separating unto God. So, if we're going to have this relationship with the Lord, there has to be a separating unto God. What that simply means is we're moving in the direction of God. You don't build relationships moving apart from one another. You move toward one another. And so it is with God. You don't build a relationship with God by moving away from God. You have to move toward God. And then whatever is done for God, it's because it is the result of moving in God's direction. So there has to be this surrender to the Lord. A personal relationship with God requires a God standard. If we are going to have a close and deep and growing relationship with the Lord must be the subject of our lives. We must subject ourselves to His authority. To His authority. We cannot have a relationship with God if we want to live according to our own authority, because that's moving away from God. You have to move to God. You have to move toward God. So that's a submission to God. It means that we make His will the rule of our lives. There's no relationship with God without that. A relationship with God requires ongoing communion with God. And by communion, I mean talking with God, listening to God. A lot of people talk to God, but they don't listen to God. Talking to somebody and talking with somebody are two entirely different things. You don't talk at God. You talk with God. And then God talks with you. and you listen. And that builds a relationship. And that's what we mean by communion with God. And how do we do that? How do we commune with God? Well, we do so through His Word. By reading His Word, God speaks to us. We talk to God in prayer, and then again we listen to God. Praying is not just talking to God. The other side of that is listening. Listening. The purpose of prayer really is to find out God's will. And the way to do that is not to do all the talking, but to listen. And all of this goes into building a relationship with God. And all of it requires the heart. The heart does not have to be involved in religion. But if you want a relationship with the Lord, you cannot have that absent the heart. The Lord demands the heart. Deuteronomy 6:5, we're to love the Lord with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our mind. Again, God requires the heart. And without the heart, there is no relationship. Now, concerning the heart, it means that it requires a keeping of the heart. Our hearts are, Jeremiah 17:9, our hearts are desperately wicked. They're wicked. And we have to keep our heart. We have to guard our hearts. Proverbs 4:23 says, keep thy heart. That is, guard it, garrison it, watch it with all diligence. That is, do this with all effort and perseverance and thoroughness, commitment. Why? For, or because out of it, that is, out of the heart, are the issues or the outgoings of life. So the neglect of this duty leads to actions and thoughts and words and intentions and wills moving away from God. And when we're moving away from God, relationship is not being strengthened. It's being weakened. It's not getting deeper. It's not growing in depth. But it's becoming more and more shallow. And sadly, if you look at the lives of most who profess to know the Lord, there's not much depth. There really isn't. There's just not much depth at all. God requires our hearts. Notice in Isaiah 29. Isaiah 29. Verse 13. Wherefore the Lord said, for as much as this people draw near me with their mouth, that is, they say the right things, and by their speech it appears that they're drawing near, and with their lips do honor me. They say things speech-wise that you would think was honoring to God. They speak highly of God, but have removed their heart from me. Their heart isn't in it. And their fear toward me is taught by the precept of men. In Isaiah 1, we will not turn there, but he says, away with it. He says, I'm tired of your solemn assemblies. In other words, I'm tired of your religion. And it doesn't matter if it's the religion of Faith Baptist Church or the religion of the Lutheran Church down the road. It doesn't matter. Religion is religion. Whether it be Baptist religion, Lutheran religion, Catholic religion, whatever. It's just religion. It's empty. There has to be a relationship with the Lord. And we see this all through this 23rd Psalm. You see he has a relationship. He has a relationship with the Lord. It's personal, it's ongoing, and it's growing. And it's growing. And that needs to always be the case. It's got to be personal. It's got to be continuous. It's got to be growing. It's basically fellowship with God throughout life. Fellowship with God throughout life. And as you read the 23rd Psalm, you see the words of someone who is in fellowship with God. And so, as we've said many times, for the child of God, life should not be unfulfilling, empty, with no real meaning, with no lasting satisfaction. But our life should be one of fellowship with God throughout life. Whatever that is, whatever is involved in that life, our life should be lived with God. With God. For the child of God, life does not have to be consumed with the world's philosophies and ways and in accord with the dictates of our flesh, and is wandering in endless circles and not getting anywhere, living in defeat, living in bondage, living lives of frustration and exasperation and dysfunction. That should not be the life of a child of God. And it won't be if we have a personal relationship with the Lord. Their life should not be chaotic. Should not be lives of turmoil and unrest. It should be a life of fellowship with God, and that's throughout life. Not just on Sundays, not just on Wednesdays. That's religion. If that's all it is a Sundays and Wednesdays, that's religion. We're talking about a relationship that goes outside this building. So this personal, ongoing relationship with God, again, it's an ongoing, it's a growing knowledge and experience of who He is. It is an ongoing and growing interaction with God, a growing togetherness with God, a growing identification with the Lord. So again, he says here to start the psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. That is, because the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. And one of the things that we do not lack is opportunity for a closer and more meaningful relationship with the Lord. Because He is our shepherd, we do not lack the opportunity. We may not take the opportunity, but we don't lack the opportunity to have a closer and more meaningful relationship with the Lord. So everybody who blames whatever they want to list for the reason they don't have a relationship, there's only one reason that a saved person does not have a relationship with the Lord, and that's themselves. It's no one else's fault. It's not circumstances' fault. It has nothing to do with it. Absolutely nothing. So we have to have this relationship. And again, the psalm ends, all the days of my life. We can have fellowship with God all the days of my life. That is, through the sorrows, through the afflictions, through adversities, through losses, through troubles, through difficulties, through disappointments, through temptations and battles. Life can be lived with God. And as you read the 23rd Psalm, that's exactly what the psalmist is talking about. He is living life with God. And again, whatever it is that you and I might have to go through, again, it's a life of passing through. It's much better with Him than on your own. It may be difficult even with Him, but it's better with Him than going on your own and trying to just figure it out. So we have to have this ongoing, progressive, personal relationship with God. And this, not just every now and then, but all the days of my life. That's consistency. Consistently walking with the Lord. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us